Hello and welcome to the first video lecture on writing at work. This week we're going to focus on the principles of professional correspondence, discuss how to write effective emails, and then conclude with some tips to help you as you move forward. There are 4 different types of communication that you'll use while at work. The first, intrapersonal communication, covers the things you say or think to yourself and influences the way you behave with the people and things around you. The next, interpersonal communication, is all about talking to one other person. Conversations with your best friend and those with your supervisor are both interpersonal communication. So this type of communication can vary widely depending on who is involved, the subject up for discussion, and the setting. Third is group communication. This is when you have at least 3 people having a conversation with one another and engaging in the sharing of ideas. If you have larger groups, like 6 people for example, you might notice that the group will break up into parts, sometimes to the point that everyone has become involved in interpersonal communication instead. And finally, public communication is when one person is speaking to a larger group. When you're giving a presentation to a room, this is the kind of communication you're engaging in. You should carefully consider how you personally tend to behave during each type of communication, since they often feed into one another. Your intrapersonal communication, that is, the messages you tell yourself, is bound to affect the way you speak to a larger group, for example. Now let's switch gears and talk about one particular type of communication, email. Here are 4 tips for how to write a successful message. First, be focused, and that includes with your subject line. People receive their weight in email every day. You want to make sure that someone can understand just why you're contacting them by looking at their inbox. A bonus is that doing so in a subject line makes it easier for someone to search for your email again in the future. Next, make sure that you're both informative and polite. In writing, it can be hard to parse someone's attitude. Manners and pleasantries go a long way, even if it's just by saying thank you. Remember the possibility that what you write will be shared with other people. That means that you don't want to write anything down that you wouldn't want to post on your front door. If you're angry, hold on to that feeling for a minute and write your email when you feel more calm. If it's a sensitive issue and you don't want it to be shared, have a face-to-face meeting instead. And lastly, make sure you proofread. An email that's filled with typos and grammatical errors doesn't make the best of first impressions. You can prevent that just from taking a moment before hitting send. And on the topic of accidents, you can also prevent accidentally sending an email by putting the recipient in the to field only after the email is actually ready to send. Here are those tips in action. You might want to watch this part of the video using full screen. In this case, the email subject line lets the recipient know just what they're going to open and read. There are some brief pleasantries, but then the email gets straight to business, including outlining whatever next steps should be taken. And all in all, the email is completely appropriate for Joe and Monica's work relationship. So here is that email, and if you'd like to read it, you can pause this video here. Let's cover some general tips for professional correspondence. In some ways, these are general best practices for whatever kinds of writing you find yourself engaging in. For example, make sure you give yourself time to consider your task and to plan it carefully. You don't want to be forced to rush as you send out a message, particularly something that's going to be seen by other people. And this also means giving yourself the opportunity to ask questions if anything about the task is unclear or makes you feel uncertain. When it comes to emails in particular and professional writing generally, Shakespeare's line, "Brevity is the soul of wit," is definitely true. Conciseness is a virtue, so don't use 100 words when 10 would do. Finally, we'll be covering audience and style later, but for now, remember that you don't work in a vacuum. For example, one colleague might have a particularly powerful eye for proofreading, and another might have a lot of experience working on the subject that you've just found on your desk. You and your coworkers are resources for each other, so don't feel like you need to go it all alone. That's it for this lecture. Best of luck as you continue to communicate and send emails out into the ether.